So let's get started with the presentation. I think we will have we already have a great discussion going, so we'll continue that. So just a reminder, we are recording, got the notification. We'll post the video on YouTube and Odyssey, and we are currently live streaming on Facebook. And we have a small group today of very knowledgeable seasteaders. So I think we can have an open discussion as soon as the presentations are done. So please welcome Chris Canaday. He's been part of the seasteading movement for several years. He's a biologist in the Amazon, where he manages a 15-hectare reforested area, teaching people about ecological sanitation. So thank you, Chris, and welcome.
Great. Yeah, and thanks for inviting me. And hopefully this is interesting, and we'll have lots of time to answer questions and everything. I've got a couple presentations, and just in summary, I'm a biologist from the United States. I'm from California. I've been living in Ecuador for 31 years, and I'm right on the west edge of the Amazon where it meets the Andes. And it was 22 years ago, I got involved with ecological sanitation. We bought a house that had a toilet dumping straight into the local river, which is the case of most places in the world, only now that house was mine, and there was no one to tell me that I couldn't do a dry toilet. So I started doing dry toilets, and they really make a lot of sense, and we'll be looking at that, because I think that's the main option, or at least the best option for sanitation on seasteads. Yeah, as we'll see, it's not high tech. Doesn't need to be high tech. There's obviously lots of different options out there, and I also want to talk about closed loop flush water recycling, where we're using the same water time and time again, and then there's no contamination of the ocean, and it really is ludicrous to be using drinking water to flush toilets, like happens in most of the modern countries, most first world countries, if we want to use that word. And so first I want to talk about this idea about urine diverting dry toilets for multi-story buildings. At least a lot of people's designs for seasteads involve multi-story buildings. And there's a lot of people who have seen these urine diverting dry toilets. We call them UDDTs. A lot of people have seen them and maybe don't like them, but there are really big advantages. Next. They're not using or contaminating water at all. Next. It allows for more efficient use of urine as fertilizer because the urine's kept pure. The feces stay drier, thus they make less odor and decompose faster. And there is that food systems report from a few years ago. Carly can put that in the chat, I presume. And yes, so next. Okay, and what do we expect from toilets in general? And how do UDTs fulfill this, right? We expect them to have no odor, and UDTs, by not mixing, there's less odor produced. In general, when you mix with water, there's more odor produced, and that small amount of odor can be ventilated away if we like. Flush toilets, of course, have no ventilation, right? The excrement, we want it out of sight, right? With UDTs, the urine drains away immediately, and the feces are covered with soil or some kind of cover material. I like to use soil, and so it's actually less visible than in flush toilets. And with the mechanism that we're going to show, people don't even have to remember to flush, so the ease of use is just as easy as flush toilets. Next. We want toilets to contribute to disease control, and disease control is infinitely better with dry toilets because the pathogens are going to die much faster all those pathogens are adapted to being in water in our guts, right? And in 90% of the world, wastewater is just going straight into the environment and other people are drinking it, you know, so the flush toilet is not the wonder that people think. We should want our toilets to be recycling nutrients. I'm coming off a cold. Hopefully my voice will hold up. With the nutrients, 90% of the nutrients are in the urine that we can keep pure and transmit directly to our agriculture. And, you know, I think one of the key bits of seasteading is also producing food on our seasteads, you know, so we really want to get that urine straight back to our crop plants. Okay, so next, this is where we were. Okay, so there's different ways that people do UDTs, and they do have some weaknesses. And one of the things that could be improved is immediate dispersal of the urine in the soil via perforated hoses. I've actually been doing that for decades, and it works great. And we never have trouble with plants being overdosed or anything. We want immediate automated addition of cover material on top of the feces. This is something no one has done. It's all, well, essentially no one. And we almost always have to add a cup of soil on the top. We need just a layer. We don't need shovels and shovels. It's just to get it out of sight and right. And another thing that's key, we don't want to have to manipulate the feces until they're no longer feces and no longer dangerous, right? And so this new design resolves all those things. Next. Okay, automatic addition of cover material. Next. And so this is a mechanism that's going to work just with the weight of the user, him or herself, without thinking about flushing or anything. And it's a big advantage because people often don't throw the cover material very accurately, and they'll spill it on the floor, and they'll get it in the urine part and whatever, and none of which is good. So this is going to work just with the weight of the person themselves. Next. And so the soil is added when the person gets up and leaves. They don't have to think about flushing. They just go on about their life. Next. Okay, we're going to see a drawing of this, but there's going to be a ratchet that turns an Archimedes screw when the person leaves. So it goes back to resting position and it adds a cup of soil. It's not rocket science. Now, this, of course, will sound funny, but there's a long duct coming from up above where the soil is coming down, and it could potentially get clogged. So the design includes a little plastic rod. We can call it a tickler that helps make sure that it doesn't get clogged on its way down, this soil. Next. Okay, and so like I said, the soil is coming down from a duct coming from the roof. Next. Okay, and it's going down another duct where it's taking at least 6 months to get to the bottom, and the pathogens have died along the way. So here we can see this is one for squatting, and the person is going to stand on that green lever, right? Next. Okay, so when they stand there, and that angle is actually the most comfortable angle for squatting. And many of you have probably never done in the squatting position, but that's the natural position for a human being. There's fewer problems with hemorrhoids and constipation. It's more hygienic. In particular, women don't have to worry about some germ on the toilet seat. There's no toilet seat. And I didn't show the funnel for the urine, but that would be going toward the front. Everyone urinates forward in that position, both men and women. And so the person is in position there, does their business, and just walks away. Next. The lever goes back up to where it was, and 1 cup of soil gets added. Like I said, it's not rocket science. Next. We can also do this for sitting, right? We're always going to have a lot of people preferring sitting. Here we can see the urine funnel, which we can do with different ways, and there's commercial ones sold. It's no problem. And the lever here, in this case, it's going to go backward just a little bit clockwise, just a few centimeters. And so once again, the person doesn't have to remember to flush. And one of the key things in all of these is that we have the lighting in such a way, the lighting in the room is done in such a way that there's no light going down that duct. So even if you looked, you couldn't see the poop unless you have a flashlight. Next. Okay, this one does show the urine diversion. Next. Okay, like I said, the lever pulls that cable, which when it goes back to resting position is going to turn an Archimedes screw. Next. Right, and so it happens when the person leaves. Next. And we can do it manually, but it's better for it to be automatic. And what we're talking about here is recycled soil, because you might be thinking, where are we going to get soil at the on the seastead? This is the finished product from that same duct, right? So periodically, we're taking soil out of the bottom when it's no longer dangerous, when it's just soil, and we take it back up to the top, and it does another cycle. And every year we're going to have some percentage extra to go into our gardens, right? It's great garden soil. So like I said, the urine is being kept separate. Next. And we didn't show the ventilation here, but there's many more options than with a flush toilet. We can have ventilation, down anywhere in that duct, well, near the top. Next. Okay, another key thing to keep in mind in all this, we want to keep the urine separate. It's also good to do waterless urinals. This is one simple model that's just based on a 5-gallon jug. And I don't want to dwell on this very much right now, but it works really good. And this one has the air coming out of the jug, coming through a soil filter in that blue bottle, right? And there's lots of different ways to do this. And this one I don't currently do with that factory funnel. We can make it a little bit bigger with a 1-gallon jug cut, and then it's looking more like a normal urinal. We can also do these for women. Next. Next. Okay, this is an important one to have a perspective on. How is nutrient recycling going to function with these urine diverting dry toilets? We've got the person, and like I was saying, 90% of the nutrients that the plants need to make our food are in the urine, and these are going straight back to our gardens, right? And the food's coming back to the person. There's only 10% of the nutrients in the poop, and the poop has all the disease risk, right? There really is 0 disease risk with people's urine being dispersed in the soil, right? 0 disease risk, right? And also in terms of pharmaceuticals that people are using and everything, the best place to put them is in the soil. And in general, plants don't even absorb those chemicals. Those chemicals are too big to get into the roots, right? And so all those chemicals are staying away from our users. And so the poop is going to spend 6 months in its detention time for all the nutrients to die, especially if we're talking about a tropical place. And I think we're mostly talking about tropical places. And we can see that the soil after those 6 months is mainly recycling back in as cover material, but some of it is going to our gardens, right? Okay, everyone's clear on that chart? Good to hear it. And do people have questions about urine diverting dry toilets while Alexander gets the other presentation set up?
Are these commercially available?
Yeah, well, the model that we just saw for multiple stories is not commercially available yet, but it's not rocket science, and I'm confident that we could do it with, you know, off the shelf supplies, you know, and we can also just make them from scratch. Yeah, it's not complicated. And there are a lot of off-the-shelf urine diverting dry toilets, and they can be any different price. One of the fancier companies is called Separate. They're in Sweden, and they have models that cost thousands of dollars, right? And they're no more effective than what I'm talking about, but they have more, you know, bells and whistles and whatever, but also those are things that could mess up, right, when you're out in the middle of the ocean. The other topic that I wanted to talk about is the concept of closed loop flush water recycling, because obviously there will be people who can't imagine using a dry toilet. They've always had a flush toilet, don't want to deal with it, you know, and I don't know if we're talking about a CB&B for millionaires to come stay on, they'll probably want a toilet that looks like what they've always had, right? And so we can give them that. And in fact, I'm getting really close to achieving this here in my house. I of course wanted to build the house with dry toilets, and my wife said, no, we're not having dry toilets in the house. And it was probably a good idea in the long run, because someday we might want to sell the house, and the buyers, of course, wouldn't understand about dry toilets and whatever. And so we actually built the house to do this closed loop flush water recycling with the black water from toilets. Everyone knows those terms. Black water is the wastewater that has poop in it, and gray water is all the other wastewater from sinks and showers and kitchens and whatever. And so I'm getting really close to having this function in the house. And with a friend from Switzerland, we're organizing to do it at a school in Kenya, where they don't have enough water. They've always dreamt of having flush toilets. They've never had enough water for that. And so this system will allow them to have upscale flush toilets for their students the whole school year. And yeah, so if anyone happens to be in Kenya in September and wants to help building on site, they're welcome to join in. So anyway, so this is a look at how to have flush toilets and still not contaminate the ocean. Next. Okay, so why do this? I think I pretty much went through this just now. Yeah, and the one thing that we have to keep track of here, like I'm saying here about the pharmaceuticals, everyone tends to think, oh, we treat the wastewater, wastewater treatment is never 100%. And there's studies from the US government itself looking at how all the chemicals that people consume, all these pharmaceuticals, go right through the wastewater treatment plants, and they go into the rivers. They're contaminating groundwater. It's totally ridiculous, you know. You know, so we're talking about a lot of things. We're talking about birth control pills. You know, what percentage of the women on these are be on birth control pills, antibiotics, antidepressives, cancer chemotherapy. We don't want to dump these things in the ocean. We don't want to be dosing the dolphins with birth control pills. And, you know, all those chemicals don't get destroyed in the human body. They come out in people's urine. And they really are affecting fish in a lot of places in the world and everything. And one of the key things, I mentioned this before, we don't need potable chemical-free water in toilets. And it really is ludicrous that people are using drinking water for flushing toilets when most of the world population doesn't even have access to good drinking water, right? And we really can't eliminate all the color and odor pathogens with the treatment. And the main thing that's still going to be in there will be the pharmaceuticals, and this system will be one of the best ways to get rid of those pharmaceuticals. Next. Okay, how would this work? And this is oriented towards seasteading. Like I said, the black water is kept completely separate, and there are different ways of doing this. What I have drawn here is with anaerobic baffled reactor, a type of bioreactor, which will keep the solids and greases in there and everything decomposed, so where it's getting all the solids and the greases out. And you can make biogas with that, so we're going to actually have some energy recovery. And I forgot that I mentioned there the vermifilter. We're going to talk about a vermifilter later. And I actually think that the vermifilter would do the job instead of this anaerobic baffled reactor. Okay, so the water comes out of the first stage. It's now clarified. Still going to have some color, some smell, some pathogens, but we can eliminate these with a floating wetland, which you'll see the drawing in just a minute. And there are other optional things. There could be a closed microalgae reactor, which could go in there if we want. We could also recover some energy there. And then the water is returned to the same toilets, right? So the water just keeps cycling and recycling. And this could be in a centralized situation or a decentralized, however we like. The water works like a conveyor belt. As water-based sanitation is done in the whole world, it's based on the concept that water is cheap and disposable, and, you know, let's just contaminate the whole planet, right? Here we're treating water as a valuable thing that it is, right? And we keep it working for what it's doing, so it's like a conveyor belt. Next. Okay, so here's the drawing of it. This is the general concept. That we have the first stage. It could be anaerobic digestion, or it could be the vermifilter that we'll get to. And then we have some sort of constructed wetland. This is a drawing for on land. And next we're going to see, this is one configuration of an anaerobic baffled reactor. The sewage is coming in here at the number 1. And a lot of solids are staying there, and they have to go through this magenta pipe to the second section. They go all the way to the bottom, then it's going up really slowly. Anyway, so it's getting rid of all the solids and the grease and the pathogens are also dying to some degree. And then we want to do the finishing stage with plants. Next. And this is what I'm designing for seasteads. This can be floating right next to the seastead. And this would have plastic walls around the sides and the bottom. And we've got this wastewater coming in, it's already clarified from the previous stage. And it's going past the roots, going down, and then it's going back up past other roots, down again past other roots. And it's getting a lot of treatment. There's a lot of bacterial activity going on there. And finally, it's going to get pumped back up to those same toilets, right? And that's a floating grass there. It could be naturally floating, or I have it drawn here with Coke bottles that allow it flotation, right? And so, yeah, totally feasible. And what I had in mind, you see on the right side says IBC, that's intermediate bulk container. Those are the 1,000 liter containers that Coca-Cola extract gets shipped around the world in, right? And so we could make that with one of those. They're very robust, they're cheap, they cost $100 pretty much throughout the world. And so yeah, so that's the idea of this closed loop flush water recycling. Next. Okay, and here's the idea of this vermifilter. This is with earthworms. And I haven't done one of these yet. I'm looking for an opportunity to do one, but I'm really excited about it, and it's a up and coming technology throughout the world. They've had a lot of success in India, in New Zealand. They even did one in Ecuador that I've never managed to go visit. But yeah, there was a whole European Union project on this. It was called Innocua. If you look on YouTube for Innocua, they had whole conferences, this whole big YouTube videos. But this is very, very simple, very, very effective. The wastewater is going in the top, and there's a layer there with sawdust or wood chips, something like that, with the earthworms. And you've got the earthworm compost building up there, the humus. Then there's a big layer of sand. And so the wastewater gets dumped there, all the solids stay where the earthworms are, and the water filters down in and drains out to where it's going to the next stage. And the key thing is that air is able to get in the bottom, so the sand isn't ever inundated. It's never saturated. It's just got the wastewater dripping through it and the air filtering up through it. So it's all very oxygenated. And so I'm excited about this because the water never goes anaerobic, right? We've got normal water that we're flushing the toilet with, and then it's only in contact with the poop for a minute, let's say, and it's transporting the poop to the vermifilter. I invite everyone to check out the Wikipedia page on vermifilters. Excuse me. Next, and I think we're done with the presentations. Yeah, and so I want to get feedback on people. Users' experience would not be any different at all. They wouldn't know that the water is being recycled unless we tell them. Right? Next. And this is something to really keep in mind. More and more places in the world, they're doing TTT. They call it direct or indirect potable water reuse, which is totally ridiculous because, well, and what that consists of is the sewage treatment plant becoming your drinking water treatment plant. And of course, it sounds disgusting, and they don't tell you about it, right? And in LA, they're doing it. In Texas, in Australia, in lots of places in the world, more and more places, because they just don't have enough water. And one thing to keep in mind is that no one should expect a toilet bowl to be 100% clean and disinfected. Someone just used it, 2 minutes before you're going to use it, right? And so the key thing is that it be presentable and that it not be a health risk. Like I say, no one's even going to know that we're doing this recycling until we tell them. Next. Okay. So now I'd like to open things up to questions.
I'd like to ask a question. So the filter, the plant filter so you have the different stages where the solids sink to the bottom, gases rise up, and then the liquid moves to the next container, right?
Right.
So what is moving the liquid to the next container?
Just gravity.
Okay, so it's as it fills up, then it moves to the next container.
Correct. Yeah. In both the anaerobic baffled reactor that was on the left and the floating wetland that was on the upper right. The water just flows by gravity, doesn't have anywhere else to go, so it just gets to that level. It's got to continue.
Okay, and then the gas. What is that gas? Like, is there an odor? Can it be used for something? If we could capture that gas being emitted?
Yeah, absolutely. It's biogas. You can just, you have to run it through maybe a cleaning process, which isn't complicated, and you can hook it up directly to your stove.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so people can be cooking on it. Although in general, and people get really excited about it. Oh, okay, we're going to forget about buying cooking gas. But the general rule of thumb is that you only have gas for cooking about 1 day out of the week. If you just have the same user's poop going into the system, right? So for example, if you're on a farm, and you've also got your cow's poop going into the system, then you might be able to cook on that gas all week, right? And so it's something to keep in mind. And it may be something that on a seastead, there's other wastes from some other product that's being worked on, some other garden waste that could be going into that digester. But it is a resource to be taken advantage of, and obviously, energy is one of the big questions on seasteads. Did I answer it?
Yeah.
Cool. Are there other questions?
Yeah, I once read that it's 1 to 2 cubic feet of gas per person per day is about what your yield would be. I don't know if you're seeing more than that.
And how much does somebody use in a day?
Yeah, I don't know what the consumption rate would be, but yeah, 1 cubic foot of gas at atmospheric pressure probably isn't very much. It's like you say, 1 week would give you 7 cubic feet of cooking gas per person. So as you're pointing out, it's not a lot of gas. So
yeah, you know, so it could be more interesting, like I say, if there's other things being produced on that seastead that can be going into the same biodigester. But anyway, there's those two options. There's the biodigester option and there's the vermifilter option. And I'm really excited about the vermifilter option now. And among other things, it's going to be producing lots of earthworms that could be fed to our chickens and fish and whatever. So and it's producing top quality soil for the garden. And
Yeah.
and then again, you know, it's just a matter of storing it for a prudent amount of time, sort of like the dry toilet, storing it for a prudent amount of time so we don't have to worry about diseases.
Now the
And
vermifilter. Oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I had a question. Yeah, you showed like a raw waste going into the top of the vermifilter, but that also showed a branch going down to the equalizer. So is the raw waste going into both that equalizer at the bottom and the
Yeah, that
and
drawing
the
was a
top?
little bit confusing. I think that was showing a pipe going back to the top because sometimes they'll recycle the water through, they'll run it through a number of times. So I think that was going from the bottom back up to the top. So but yes, that's a little bit confusing, but I'm glad that you pointed it out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe some arrows in there to show the flow direction might clarify. Because there's also then kind of in the intermediate, like the sand area, that there was some another input or water, or was that an exit?
Maybe we can
There's-
show that again. Is that possible, Alexander? And
Yes, that shouldn't be a problem. Yeah,
yeah,
just one moment.
okay, thanks. But
And then does the vermifilter, does it accumulate additional material that needs to be removed? As
yeah,
you know, as it processes waste.
and it's a super valuable resource. It's soil for our gardens. It's the earthworm compost, the humus that the earthworms are producing, and yeah, and so periodically you take out some of that soil, you know, and then we store it a prudent amount of time. Okay, thanks, Alexander. Yeah, that is confusing, but pay no attention to that line on the left side. We're talking about the raw wastewater just going in the top and the processed water coming out the bottom, right?
Okay, I see that label where it says
Yeah,
recirculated
that's what we're talking about,
wastewater.
recirculating, because sometimes they do that just to improve the treatment percentage. But
I
yeah,
see. You can kind of control your concentration of what's coming in at the top, I guess.
yeah,
By
I mean,
supplementing with that.
yeah, it's just by running it through a number of times, they get better final effluent.
Mhm.
Yeah, and one of the key things with this, you can sort of see the letters are really small, but you can put cloth in there wherever you want it, and that in particular, I would have a cloth right under the layer of sawdust with the earthworms, right? And when it's starting to build up, I would add another cloth with new sawdust, right? Leave the old one still there, but eventually pull out those layers from down below when we need to take stuff out, right? Because one of the things that we found, I say we, but the people who have worked on this, in particular, this one colleague in Argentina, that the verma castings, these earthworm castings, the humus is really the best filter for this wastewater. And he treats, this Argentine friend, treats all kinds of agro-industrial wastewater and everything with great success. And he just swears up and down that the earthworm castings, that earthworm humus, is the best thing for filtering out all kinds of stuff from the water.
Okay, yeah, so it's like the way you have it, you don't have to really disturb any of the stack if you're just removing the earthworm humus from the very top
Yeah, except
instead of
that,
disturbing what's underneath. Huh?
right, but what I would do, I would have it each layer of the earthworms on a cloth, right? And there may be several in there, and when we need more room because the whole thing's filling up, we could lift the top two layers and pull out the third layer down, right? And it wouldn't have gotten any new material, so the earthworms themselves would have crawled up to where the new material is. So it's basically just the earthworm compost, and we can pull that out, you know, and store it for however long we want, or we can put it out to dry in the sun. Then we wouldn't need to store it for months and months. And we have soil for the garden.
So it's a geotextile fiber. Is that like a basalt fabric? Rock wool fabric or something?
No, that's what it sounds like, but it's just plastic. Um, and I don't think that we need to use geotextile per se. This is uh, a diagram pulled off of Wikipedia. We can just use any kind of normal cloth. I'm thinking of just using polypropylene sacks and opening them. You know, the sacks that flour and grain and fertilizer come in.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the sawdust could be replaced with like a ground seaweed, ground up dried seaweed?
Yeah, and actually, one of my East Indian colleagues doesn't use sawdust or wood shavings or anything at all, and so there's a lot of flexibility on that. Yeah, and so that can do lots of different things, and that among other things, it's just sort of to create a habitat for the worms, and it's going to help give the space where the water can drain out, because like the earthworms need to be moist, but they don't want to be flooded, right? Mm-hmm. And so when somebody flushes, you know, the whole thing might get flooded for just a minute, but that's all right. And the water is going to drain down through the whole column. The solids are going to stay on the top, and then the earthworms come and eat it all.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
others might have questions too, so sorry I took so long.
No problem. Are there other questions?
Yeah, I find it very interesting, all this. And I'm not very knowledgeable of it. And, you know, I appreciate you coming on and talk to us about it. How, is there any studies or information as far as if something like this were used in a seasteading, like you mentioned? What about like growing things like ocean type of plants? Would it be good for them too?
Oh, you mean
Kelp or?
Oh yeah, presumably, although I think the key thing would be to give those plants our urine, right? And okay. And even if we're growing algae, macroalgae, or microalgae, seasteaders are probably going to want some normal vegetables too, some normal fruit, some tomatoes, and right. Whatever. And so, you know, it may not be the whole story, but I think we're going to want some agriculture with plants that have roots in the soil, and we can produce some food that we're used to.
Yeah, seaweed, for example, too. You know.
Things yeah, like seaweed's great, but if we tell the seasteaders that they can only eat seaweed, I think they'll jump ship on us.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. But just in general though, I mean, like you say, it would be good for plants in the ocean or in the water, I should say, not just the ocean, but sea.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, and that earthworm compost would probably also be good for all those marine organisms as well. And it might be going to the bottom, but it would still be releasing all kinds of good nutrients and everything. But I think we'll probably want to keep it in our above water gardens.
Right. Yeah. So what are your plans? I mean, you've been working on this for a long time. You sound like you're well versed on it. What are your plans going forward? Where are you putting your concentration?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a little bit of pie in the sky or whatever, but we want to have a sustainable future, and I think we all realize that we got to do something different, and this is something that isn't that complicated. It's much less complicated than telling people to forget about consumerism, and forget about fashion and forget about buying new cars all the time and heating their houses, that people can learn to throw soil on their poop instead of throwing drinking water, and so my goal is for this to go as mainstream as possible. And
How mainstream could it go? I mean, give us an example. Give us an example if it was mainstream. I'm sure it would look different than what you're doing. It would have to look, appropriate.
Yeah, well, I mean, with if we do the closed loop flush water recycling, people won't even know that we're doing it until we tell them, right? We do in general want to keep the urine separate, and there's actually an upscale flush toilet being produced in Switzerland. It's a company called Laufen. And you would just, looking at the toilet, you would have no idea that it's doing the urine diversion, but it does. And it's a totally new concept. And they're actually donating some for our project at the school in Kenya. So we're excited about seeing those and testing, among other things, what percentage of the urine it's keeping separate and what percentage of the flush water goes down the tube with the urine. But yeah, and so I've been inserting the idea where possible, and I've especially wanted people to pick up on the idea in California. They have this terrible drought. They're drinking toilet to tap water in Southern California, right? They do put it into the aquifer, but no one's telling how far away in the aquifer they're pumping it back out. No one's saying that, right? And these are chemicals that don't break down. If it was a matter of bacteria in the water, moving through X amount of distance through the aquifer might wipe out bacteria. It's not wiping out these chemicals, right? And
That's scary.
yeah, it's really scary, and no one's looking at it. And there's not even a single test to measure how well they've gotten those chemicals out. But what the hell, we need water, and so they're doing it, all the time. And then people are wondering, why women are having trouble with fertility. They're getting all the other women's birth control pills in their drinking water. Yeah.
So,
And,
I mean, let's say like a neighborhood, sorry to interrupt, but let's say a regular neighborhood of homes. I mean, how big of a system are we talking about to have in people's homes? And, like you said, you wouldn't even know it's there almost.
Right. I mean, it could be any scale. It could be any scale. And this is part of an overall
How about
concept
apartment buildings?
Yeah, no, that would be spectacular. And so in the apartment building, it could be either of these two systems. It could be the the urine diverting dry toilets for multiple stories, or it could be the closed loop flush water recycling. But I have the concept where we could have an apartment building as tall as we want, and there's no wastewater coming out of it, right? Because we can be using all the water, we can be recycling everything in different ways, right? That, for example, water from the laundry doesn't need to be dumped down the drain. It can be recycled, it can be treated in a similar way to what we were talking about, and that could be used in the wash cycle for the next load. And then we can use fresh water for the rinse cycle, right? And if people are using
Right.
non-biodegradable detergents, which is what people mostly use, those detergents are going to keep working, and they don't go down the drain contaminating the environment. And with these systems, with these artificial wetlands, we'd be losing water through the evapotranspiration of the plants, right? So that in theory could be equal to the amount of drinking water and clean tap water that's going into the building. That could be equal to the evapotranspiration from our plants, right? So there's water coming into the plant, but it's leaving via water vapor from the plants, and zero contaminated wastewater going into the sewer.
I had a picture from last year. I was out in Utah, and this was a latrine in one of the bars, and it's one of those waterless ones. It's a Sloan, water-free. And I noticed that they seem to be in Starbucks, the waterless urinals.
Huh.
So that seems to be catching on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and those waterless urinals aren't what I'm talking about, actually. Those are really expensive. They cost like $400, and there's a cartridge that has to be changed every year and whatever. And it costs that much because they're connected to the sewer, and they're keeping the stench from the sewer from coming back up where the person is, and we don't need any of that. And I have waterless urinals here in our house that work perfectly well. I made them with 1 gallon plastic bottles that rescued out of the garbage, some rubber hose and a plastic hose that goes through the wall of the building. It just goes outside. It drains into the soil. The plants are happy to have it. It's great fertilizer. And we're not wasting water, and I'm not spending $400 on each unit.
But what about people taking drugs, like you say? They wouldn't necessarily be adding good stuff to the soil.
Well, yeah, and that's something people worry about. And there's actually a group in Vermont. Check this out if you have time. The Rich Earth Institute in Vermont. You can see them on Facebook, and they're actually having a webinar next week or something on this whole issue of pharmaceutical contamination of the crops. But in general, it's really not a problem, because plant roots don't just absorb anything out of the soil. They're absorbing very specific things, and they're going in these little windows in the rootlets, in the root hairs, that only water goes in this little bit, and only sodium ions go in this little bit, and everything. And if we have this huge organic compound, this artificial hormone or something from birth control pills, they're not going to fit in those little windows in the root hairs.
Okay.
Right.
Well, you sound like you really got your stuff down.
Well, yeah, I've been looking at it for a while, And these people at the Rich Earth Institute are working with the University of Michigan and different places, and they've done all this super high-tech stuff, and looking for the pharmaceuticals in the final crop. And they're finding just tiny amounts that you'd have to eat, a ton of the carrots, or whatever it is. You'd have to eat an incredible amount that you'd never be able to eat to have the same amount that's in one pill that people are taking, whatever.
Chris, you bring up, this is a very interesting subject. It's something that people don't normally talk about. We don't even think about it, but I'm especially interested, as an ambassador with the Seasteading Institute, that its application to the seasteads, that it, for long-term living, that, it could, on a larger scale, it would be the way to go. There's no doubt about it.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I got involved with Seasteading, is that, this is going to be a showcase for the rest of the world. So here's a seastead that's living happily and healthy and everything and not contaminating the ocean. What if everybody on land stopped contaminating the environment?
Right.
Wouldn't that be? Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Because actually, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, listening to you talk, that why isn't this being done already on a very large scale? And I never really thought about the fact that, we basically, use drinking water, to flush our toilet, where there's so many people around the world that don't have drinking water to begin with. So, it's something we just take for granted. So, I'm wondering if that's going to change. But I read about stories in the future with the population and the amount of water available, things are going to change. So this might be in the mix. In fact, I would think it would be.
Yeah, it's one of the most logical things to start doing. And like I say, it's a whole lot easier than getting people to stop heating their houses and throw away their air conditioning units and and whatever. And look at your drinking water. I don't know where everyone's from today, but like water from the Florida aquifer, have a look at it. And Southern California, like most places in the world, I mean, really have a look at the water that people are giving to you. And it's one of the things, it's like, it's a little bit of one more brick in the wall, the whole system, everyone's brainwashed that the municipality has everything under control and we can drink the tap water. Right. Of course, that's not the case here in Ecuador. No, everyone knows to not drink the tap water, but in a developed country, everyone's brainwashed. The United States. Okay, say this is something that no one's taking care of, and there's all this chemical contamination that they can't even monitor. Right. There's not even, like I say, one test to see how well they've gotten the chemicals out. They have to do gas spectrometry looking for each individual chemical, right? And how many thousands of chemicals are there, just talking about pharmaceuticals?
Why don't they have a better way of testing? Why don't they have a better way of testing that they can test for everything?
They can't do it. No one has figured that out.
Oh, well, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no one has figured it out.
I think we've reached the end of our time for our meeting, but unless anyone has any more questions for Chris, you can unmute yourself or put the question in the chat.
And one quick thing about last month's talk, I found a video for a great way to make energy with ocean currents. And maybe I can ask Carly to share that in the chat or something.
Yeah, I can see that.
But yeah, and so it's very practical, and I think this could be scaled scale down.
Oh.
So.
Well,
here's
thank you.
To,
Oh, sorry, Chris. I think you're breaking up a bit.
Units cost, but they're available on the market right now. Oh, sorry to hear her.
All right. Okay. I think we're losing your internet, Chris. But I just wanted to thank everyone for attending, and sorry for our hiccup. And we'll have more security measures for our next call, which is on August 20th. And I hope to see you all there. And thanks again, Chris. Very helpful. We'll be sharing this video. I think it's something that seasteaders really need to think about. That we really need to know how we're going to handle waste. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's very interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Very interesting.
All right, everyone have a good evening.
Thanks.
See ya.
All right. Good night, everybody.